let me just introduce myself. My name is Kahaulani Hemakana Ona Maikalani Jones. So that's a whole big mouthful. A lot of people don't like all the vowels in between there. So I go by a shortened version Kahaulani Jones. For some reason, all those syllables just make people confused. So we try to make things easy for people. Sorry. So just my own disclaimer, I have to say. This was actually a quote from Ben Hewitt, author of a book called Homegrown, which is kind of what my presentation was loosely based off of. But he said this, and I share the same thing with you. He says, I hasten to remind you that just because someone, including myself, says something is so, does not make it so for you. In other words, it's not so much my intention to convince you of anything in particular, but rather to share my family's journey toward gaining the confidence to trust in your own beliefs and innate wisdom, with the hope that it may help you trust in your innate wisdom. And I think I may have. Yes, okay. So with that in mind, let me introduce my family to you, if you can see it very well. These are my kids. This is my oldest, Tatiana, who is here with us, and Kira as well. She is 11, Tatiana's 14, Kira's 11, Keenan is 10, and this is Rion, he's our little rambunctious 3-year-old, and Nia. And that is my wonderful husband who just managed to pull a post that was cemented into the ground. Some more pictures. This is Kira and Keenan down the bottom here, learning how to ride. It's kind of hard to see. Learning how to ride a unicycle, and that's Rion just being himself. So this is my family. We've been homeschooling for about 9 years, officially homeschooling. And just a little background, I met my husband at BYU in 1995, and we dated for 2 years before we decided to get married, which, if any of you are familiar with BYU, you know that that's an anomaly. And apparently we have a knack for doing things different. Of course, I just assumed that we would start having children right away. That was like, okay, now we're having a family. But the Lord has a way of throwing curveballs, and that's exactly what we got. We got a curveball. After a couple of years of fertility treatments and feelings of depression and exhaustion, we decided to put having a family on the back burner. And I say exhaustion because at that same time I was working towards a master's degree in public administration, also at BYU. So after graduation, we decided, you know what, let's celebrate. Let's just forget everything and celebrate. And so we planned on a student's budget. We planned a trip to Europe. Of course, that meant staying in hostels and doing a ton of walking. So we arrived in France. We were planning to go to Paris in France, and we arrived in Paris, and the first place that we stayed at was the most dumpy hostel. We're staying at hostels, right? Hostels are very different from hotels. It was so dumpy. You could, when you walked into the place, you could see the bugs, you could smell the mold. It was going to be a great adventure. But hey, we were in France, we were in Paris, so we were going to just enjoy ourselves and have a great time. Well, I was so exhausted and so tired. I told my husband, I said, you know what? I am just so tired. I must have really, really bad jet lag. And he became frustrated with me because we just wanted to go and do stuff, and all I wanted to do, he just wanted to go do things, and all I wanted to do was sleep. And I wish I had the picture. I have a picture of myself in Paris sleeping on a bench. That's how tired I was. So the exhaustion eventually led to vomiting, and I thought, oh no, I've eaten something really bad. I've got food poisoning. And eventually we got a clue, and we realized, let's get a pregnancy test. And sure enough, that was the end of our trip to Europe and the beginning of 7 more months of misery. So what I had was a condition called hyperemesis gravidarum. I don't have any of you heard of that before? Well, hyperemesis gravidarum is basically it's morning sickness with a vengeance. It lasts all day long, all night long, all throughout the pregnancy, and it's not just being sick, it is actually you are constantly vomiting. And it takes a lot of care and management to keep the mom and the baby alive, often requiring IV treatments and hospitalization. So that's the situation I found myself in. And it's those times when I would say to myself, you know, if we can make it through this, we can make it through anything, right? And I think we kind of all have those moments in our lives. And so today I'm sharing this with you because I wanted a big family, and I didn't realize how that condition would affect not only my ability to have children, but also my ability to homeschool and to be a parent. So my goal today is to share some practical, realistic survival tips for you. Keeping in mind what Ben Hewitt said, what works for me may not work for you. But I'd like to share ways that we can help our kids become independent learners, and also how to choose independent learning curriculums. And then if there's time, we'll have some time for questions and comments, because I realize that we're kind of all in this journey together, and your wisdom is just as valuable as you know, as we can all share in the wisdom, I guess is what I'm saying. So before I really begin, I'd like to get to know you all a little better. How many of you are just starting out homeschooling? Awesome. And you're thinking about homeschooling. How many of you have been homeschooling for a while? Okay, how many of you have more than one child? Okay, how many of you are have children with special needs? Yeah, okay. How many of you are not independently wealthy? Because if you were, then you don't need this class. You need like the other class before, which was on control. Anyway, so you're here because at some point in your life you're going to feel that stress, and maybe it's not homeschooling, maybe it's, you know, work or school even for yourself, or just being a parent. Eventually, at some point, you're going to feel burnt out, right? But let's talk about homeschool burnout. So, what are some of the causes of homeschool burnout? What would you guys say? Why would you get burnt out from homeschooling? And some of you who may be fresh on your journey, then you maybe are not aware of things that might make you feel burnt out. Well, we'll just go through some of these. Financial stress, that's, you know, definitely a big one. Homeschooling, you can do it on a shoe dime, or I get all my idioms mixed up, so you have to correct me if I get it wrong. You can homeschool on a shoestring, that's it. You can get all your materials from the library. You can do it for free. I mean, look at Good Will Hunting, right? If you've seen that movie. But not always. Sometimes we need the money. Sometimes that financial support means that one or both parents are going to be working outside the home. Lack of support. That's another one. Time constraints. Your health and physical, emotional ailments, that's a big one. A lot of times, especially like what I explained in my story before, when you get sick, what do you do then, right? And we're going to talk about that. So, unexpected life events, these things are going to happen. People die, you have births, right? People are born, people lose their jobs. I mean, all these unexpected things can happen. Dependency, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And unrealistic expectations and competition, right? So all of these things are not only the root causes of homeschool burnout, but I think, well, they all contribute to each other, and sometimes they cause a spiraling effect. So we can't really, I'm not the one to talk to you about your financial problems, unfortunately. And to be honest, we don't always have the support. And yesterday, I apologize if you were at the panel yesterday, I may have seemed really hard-hearted when I said, you know what, we don't always have support, but it's true, it really is true. We don't always have the time to take a mother's time out, or, you know, or even the money maybe, and your husband might not have the time to, you know, to sort of, I hope that, it's my hope that you get the time to take off if you need it really bad, because that is very important. Time constraints, health problems, unexpected life events, those are all things that are just part of life, right? No matter if you're homeschooling or whatever you're doing in life, those are things that we all have to deal with. So let's talk about these two last ones, dependency and unrealistic expectations and competition. These are two things that we can actually do something about, and I think we should do something about. In fact, I think if we develop healthier habits in those two areas, then we'll find that our schools and our lives will be a lot more successful. So let's talk about dependency. What is dependency? Dependency in a home is where a parent does for the child what the child should do for themselves, right? So 10-year-old leaving a big messy room, who's the one cleaning that room? Is it you or is it your child? Dependency can also come in the form of a great psychological, emotional need to feel irreplaceable, to be recognized and appreciated. And I know we all like the recognition. We all like to feel appreciated. But when you create a relationship with a child or someone else because you need to be appreciated, then that could be an issue. And lastly, dependency can create in children, oh, maybe this is not the last. Dependency can create in children a sense of inadequacy, self-doubt, lack of confidence in their own abilities, inability to be self-reliant, and fear of failure. Now, some of these things, I'm sure, if you look at our, step back and look at our society today, I think you'll know what I'm talking about, right? You know, the inability to be self-reliant and fear of failure. You know, our school district back in Wisconsin just implemented, they implemented Common Core, but along with that, they implemented all across the board grade system. So no one can fail, but no one can really succeed either. And we're seeing a lot more of that, I think, in our society. And lastly, dependency fosters laziness and entitlement, and I strongly believe that. So, in the winter of 2013, my husband and I decided to grow lavender to support our farm. We live on an 80-acre piece of property, and with all that acreage, you ought to become more self-reliant, right? Right. So we decided, what's our thing going to be? We decided to grow lavender. Lavender loves warm climates. It comes from the Mediterranean, so this is a huge risk on our part. But one thing we've learned about lavender is that it doesn't like too much moisture or cold, which could both be issues. In fact, it's very susceptible to a virus or to fungus. And so I think that one of the things that I've learned is that you have to create just the right environment in order for lavender to be healthy, right? Too much light, too much heat, too much moisture, it's gonna die. Not enough airflow, it's gonna die. So much the same way with young lavender plants, there are positive things that we can do in our home environments that will help eliminate the fungus of dependency. And I call it a fungus because that's what it is. And you can't really see this too well, but that's a pretty sad looking batch of lavender right there. So it begins with a belief system, which are premises. And the first is that each of us has the innate ability to learn, grow, and adapt to our environment and circumstances. These are all truths that maybe are not, well, they're self-evident, but not really accepted in schools these days. Each of us is able to have a direct line to inspiration and revelation. which will lead us to our best path of happiness. In other words, will reveal the genius within us. And the last one is our role as parents and leaders is invaluable. We are what some call genius makers. Have you ever heard that term before? Well, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. We're what some call genius makers. We're primarily responsible for drawing out the best in our children and connecting them with a direct link to God. So have any of you ever been asked, how do you teach all those subjects to all those kids? Have you been asked that? Okay, well, I like to give the jaw-dropping answer, I don't. And then they think, oh, what kind of homeschooling parent are you? But you know, it's a huge fallacy to think that that the only way to learn is to have a teacher. That idea, that mentality that is ingrained within us, like you have a teacher, you have students. I prefer to think of it as we all contribute together. Everybody has something valuable to input. Liz Wiseman, the president of Wiseman Group and also a graduate of the Marriott School of Management, said this. She said, she called it the rookie mode when you are doing things that you're inexperienced at. When we are in this rookie mode, whether we are 25 years old or 65 years old, we operate unencumbered by knowledge. So we see more possibilities and we explore more. We lack know-how, so we have to go out and get it. And when you think about really young kids and the way they explore and the way they reach and grab, and always asking questions, why? It's wonderful. And at first you think, oh, that's so cute, and then it gets really annoying. And then you have to at some point realize that they're actually digesting what you're telling them, so you better tell them something smart. But that was Liz Wiseman. So being in this realm of inexperienced, when you get thrown into something new, you ask more questions, and it forces us to consider the possibility that I might be wrong. What I'm doing, whatever it is, might be wrong, because you don't have those predispositions. Oops, let me go back to that one. So Malcolm Gladwell, he's the author of several bestsellers, including a book called Outliers or Blink. Some of you may have heard those. He also wrote a book called David and Goliath. And anyway, he shared the story about a competition that put two generals together. One of the generals used a strategy. Their leadership strategies were totally different. One of the generals used a strategy where he gathered as much information as he could, and then he organized and he operated from a central command station and gave out orders. The other general, however, went with his gut feeling, and he not only he went with his gut feelings, and he allowed his troops on the ground to do the same. In fact, he didn't just, whoa, where did we go? I'll go back. Not only did he allow his troops to go with their gut instincts, but he required it of them. So he required for them to make their own decisions. And now this may surprise you, because we have this idea that knowledge is power. Well, the underdogs won in this case. They were able to respond to the situations much more quickly, and everybody using their knowledge and information together were able to respond faster because they weren't encumbered by information. And you look at the internet today, right? Information. Not all of it's true either. So we're getting overloaded with information. Another example was Lawrence of Arabia. He's another example of someone who was able to draw out the strengths in others, to put the ill-disciplined Arabs and unequipped Arab fighters against the Turkish army and all of their well-prepared legions. To put them against each other was very risky, and that was during World War I. But he was able to what was his secret to success? Well, his life, he lived the life of a Bedouin. So he lived among the people, and he dressed as they dressed, he ate what they ate, and he pushed himself to ride harder on the camels and to go further than the other men that he served with. He earned their respect and discovered their strengths. So utilizing their strengths, he and their unconquerable fighting spirit, as well as their ability to survive the harsh desert climates and travel all these many miles on camelback, he utilized those strengths to win. And he changed their tactics. He changed their fighting tactics to suit them instead of adapting the British tactics or putting British tactics to them. He made their tactics, well, what am I trying to say? I think you get the gist. But he changed their fighting tactics so that to suit them, to suit their gifts and talents. They avoided direct confrontation with the Turks and employed guerrilla warfare techniques, strategies. He was a genius maker. So there's that, genius maker. So compare these examples to education and in evaluating the way that we teach our children. I ask myself, am I allowing my children to develop the skill of learning? So the skill of learning doesn't have to come through academics. I mean, we think of the classical world as pound it into them, right? Latin, Greek, math. But the skill of learning can be developed through anything. And wouldn't you rather have the skill of learning than just, I know how to speak Latin? I'd rather have the skill of learning so that you can unlock so many other doors. Children are gonna be different. They're gonna have different interests than you. So if you try to impose your own interests on your children instead of teaching them how to learn so that they can discover their own interests, and again, it's all about drawing out their talents and gifts. The next thing, opportunity to use. Am I giving my children the opportunity to use the knowledge that they've acquired? Do I encourage my children to seek revelation and to also to look for innovation, ways to change it up, to invent new things? Do I inspire performance versus compel performance? Inspiring performance is very different from compelling. Compelling means, or let's start with inspiration, would be like, do you, in positive ways, help to criticize and build up your children so that they can make corrections if they need to, but in positive ways, versus compelling performance would be like, you have to pass this test. And then the negative response is, if you don't pass this test, then, so positive versus negative influence there. Drawing out do I draw out the genius in my child and allow them for success and failure? And that's huge. Like I was saying earlier about the school district where we live in Wisconsin, not allowing your kids to fail is a huge mistake. This is the time that they need to learn that when you fail, you get back up and try again. And it's better to learn that now than to learn it when they're older. So here's some more pictures of our farm changing. Yeah, so these are, and that's my son and AJ. These are all pictures of our farm. That was the first trout that he caught, and that was just a couple of weeks ago, so it was very exciting for him. But when we first, changing my belief system was the first step to overcoming dependency and my tendency to develop unrealistic expectations. Of course, life crises also played a very major part in that, in helping me to recognize some very core principles. When we first started homeschooling, I had grandiose plans. We were gonna have so much fun learning. I had all these great curriculums picked out, and we were doing the classical method, and I had our schedule all marked out, and science was not gonna be an afterthought. We were gonna learn Latin. We were gonna, do languages, whereas normally they're reserved for older grades. And so we began. And this is what our end of the year report looked like. It was very neat, actually. I even made a macro. See, this is my first year. I have one child, so maybe I had a little too much time on my hands, I'm not sure. But I had one child and I bound it all nicely. I even made a macro that would help keep track of all the hours, because in the state of Missouri where we lived at the time, you had to have so many core hours and so many non-core hours, so I would track all of that information. Crazy, huh? And then everything was nice and neat. Well, the second year we kind of moved on to the same thing. It wasn't so bad. We were also steeped in classical education, and then I got sick. I got sick because I was pregnant, and Tatiana was in second grade. I had a toddler. So Tatiana was in second grade and Kira was a toddler here. And she needed my attention, and my husband's job was like crazy busy. They were demanding extra overtime hours, unlike we hadn't expected any of that. So that year everything changed. I had no family help, and there was just very little support. So many of the people I knew didn't even know what hyperemesis was and how bad it is. And second, many people couldn't understand why we were homeschooling. So there was like no support, because we lived in one of the best school districts in St. Louis. So I knew that if we could make it through that year homeschooling, then we could definitely make it through anything. So what did we do? We pulled back. We went back to the basics. At age 7, Tatiana had to make her own schedule. She had to keep track of her own learning, and she had to write down everything that she was doing. All of those award-winning curriculums that I thought were so wonderful and fabulous, guess where they went? They went back on the shelf and never came off the shelf again, because they required too much parental involvement. So she had to take her education in her own hands, and she had to become an independent learner. And here's the other side of that. I had to let her. So who likes to be out of control? I don't know if any of you, when it's like freezing rain outside, you look outside, oh, freezing rain, awesome. Grab your car keys, go outside and go for a drive. Just to spin out for the thrill of it, right? No, I'm guessing that most of us probably like to keep our wheels on the ground. And I'm kind of more that way, though I'm learning it's okay to spin out. Well, so my experience was kind of like driving in freezing rain. You spin out and you hope for the best. You hope you don't end up in that ditch over there or worse. Well, we survived. We survived that year, and then we survived again when I had Nia, and that one was even worse. I had to get a PICC line, lots of hospital visits, and then we survived again when Rion came along. So what did I learn? I learned how to choose a good curriculum that would encourage independence in my children, and I began teaching my children not to wait for me. And I began to see the value of moving out of the way of their education. And this goes along with that whole knowledge thing. Sometimes we are the ones that are keeping our kids from truly innovating, because we're imposing these bits of knowledge that we have instead of allowing them to explore other possibilities. So I learned the value of moving out of the way of their education. So let's talk about independent curriculums. Oops, I moved on faster than I should have. There's so many programs out there. I mean, you guys probably aware. And every year, more and more things come out, and you think, oh, that looks good. Oh, that looks good. There's so many things out there to do. I remember one year when I went to the St. Louis Expo, I had just barely had Nia. So she was 1 week old. This is how, I mean, when you have no support, right, you just have to do things. So I took Nia with me. She was just 1 week old, and went to the expo. Crazy. But I loved going there because it's so valuable to me to thumb through things, which is why I brought a bunch of stuff for you guys to look at if you want to. Anyway, 1 week old in my arm, I'm looking at this huge thing, a vendor booth with Rainbow Resource. If you've heard of Rainbow Resource, they're like got everything under the sun. And I'm just feeling overwhelmed and exhausted. I just had a baby. And I hear this and I'm praying. I'm like, oh, Heavenly Father, please help me. And I hear this lady from across the table. She's talking to me and she says, oh, there's so much to look at. And then she says, I think it's best just to stick with what you know. And that was like, boom, that was what I needed to hear. After that, you know, I pretty much left the conference, went home and went to sleep. It was exactly what I needed to hear. So the first step that I always take in trying to choose something is to seek inspiration. But then I also have a tendency to overanalyze things a lot. So there are some other things I look for, and one is it child driven? How much will my child be depending on me to give the lesson? Is it age appropriate? Will my child of a certain age be able to read or understand it? Is it at their level? Intensity is important to me. How long will my child take to complete a lesson? I like to give short lessons. Maybe it's because that's the way I learn. Also, there's a bunch of research out there that says shorter lessons, that's the way to go. That you'll retain it better and you'll just feel a lot more refreshed after, instead of 2 hours worth of learning. But also how long it takes to complete the lesson, and is it challenging? Will it be challenging for my child? Because I don't want them to be stagnant. I want them to keep growing. Self-correction, can they correct their own work? That's kind of a big thing for me. Of course, there are some things that you're going to want to make sure that they're doing okay. Interest, is it even going to be interesting to my child? The use of primary or literary sources. To me, these are gold. When a child reads a story, they retain it better. When it comes from the actual resource, they not only do they learn it better, but it's like incorporated into their whole system. It's like vitamins for your body, for your brain. And application, can they apply it? Or is it memorable? Is it relevant? Is it meaningful? And I put there, stories, please. When a child, again, when a child hears a story, they remember it so much more. And the last one I have here, and there are so many other things that you can look at when you're trying to choose a curriculum, but the last one I like to look at, what is it? Does it have a holistic approach? In other words, does it cover more than one subject? Right? Because if in 15 minutes you can cover English and writing and math and, whoa, you've got a good thing going there. So those are some of the things that I like to look at. These are a list of a few of my favorite curriculums. And once again, like I said, oh, I never did tell you. So this was my first year recording my homeschool adventure. And this is what we do now. We just, last year I just threw the schedules in there and put a rubber band around it and put it in a box. So yeah, we've come a long way to making things more simple, not worrying, not not being too fussy. So these are some of the curriculums that I like to use that have qualities that were mentioned on the previous story. I don't know what one of my favorite things to use, though, I love the mystery of history, and one of the reasons I love it, we started out with Story of the World, and I chose that one because of the stories, of course, because I think the kids really value and remember the stories. But then I discovered this one, and the stories were so well written, and it really brought history to life for the kids. And once again, thinking back on the last slide, the stories were relevant to their lives. They had application and meaning. It was like, oh, well, how does Egypt relate to me? Well, in this particular series, she will tell you how it relates to you. And so that's one of the things I like. We try to keep things simple. Like for another aspect of history, this is something that takes, like, I don't know, how long does it take you guys to draw a map? like 5 minutes maybe. And you're working on art skills because they're learning to see and draw at the same time. Yeah, it's not like a bird or a fancy Picasso picture, but it's the skill of learning to use your brain, your eyes, your hands, your pencil, touch the paper. So something that we like to incorporate in our school for history is just to have the kids draw. So they draw and label a map, and we take it one section at a time. And once they've mastered it, then they move on to another section. So for example, we start with North America, and they just, I don't have to do anything. They pull out the map book, they look at the map, they draw North America, they write down all the names. And then if they think that they know it, then I'll print something out for them and I'll give it to them, and they write it down, and if they've done a really good job, then they can go on to South America or Central America. So, I mean, we try to do things that are very simple, keeping in mind a holistic approach, short amount of time, something that they can do on their own. Did you have a question?
I'm just wondering if you do all your kids together when you do something like that. Do you have all your kids there, or is it more like an individual, like, here, you go do this? Or?
Right, okay, so once again, I really value, one of the things I learned through my experience was like, I don't want my kids to wait for me. I want them to go ahead and start their day. So they know that, because when I get up in the morning, I've got 1,000,001 other things that I've got to do. And then I've also got 2 younger ones that they need help with some things like breakfast or reading, or, you know, because they don't read on their own like some of the older kids do. So I encourage them, actually, now it's what we call in Hawaiian, it's called kuleana. It's your responsibility. Your responsibility is to get up in the morning, eat breakfast, and get started with your schoolwork. They don't wait for me. Now, we do also have a group scripture study, but I realized early on that if we wait for me to do group scripture study, we'll never get started with school. So we do scripture study when I am able to, right? And so everybody comes together, and when I say, okay, let's do our scripture study. So for those of you who might like a more regimented day, that might not work for you. But for allowing for the flexibility, allowing your kids to have that sense of responsibility, that you get up, you do your work. That's, you know, just like Dad goes to work, and I do my chores and things, and then we have animals too that also require attention. So I have my own set of chores as well. Did you have another?
So I try to do that, and that's like the ideal, but what happens is some of my kids are less motivated than others, and they end up, I find them downstairs in the Lego bin, and they've been there for 3 hours.
Oh no.
What are you doing? And I have a hard time. How do you teach that sense of responsibility and give them that sense of, I've got to get this done and make the most of my time? And I mean, that's what I struggle with.
Yeah, well, and I think that's definitely a valid, I mean, something that a lot of us struggle with. It's something that you have to actually ingrain in them, I think. And it's not just through academics, it's you do it, and we'll talk about this in a minute here, hopefully. You have to ingrain this in them at a young age and in everything that you do. Meaning not just studying is your responsibility, but this notion, and I think what we did was we constantly reminded them, constant reminding. And just saying that, you know, our family does not work if Dad doesn't go to work. What happens? You know, it's just to help them to see the consequences, and to help them to understand what, and maybe even asking them, what do you think your responsibility is? And asking questions and having them answer. Close your ears, because I don't want you to know the secret. The secret is to let them own the response, right? So ask them the question, what do you think about playing Legos all day? And maybe this is their diamond, or that's what their genius is to play Legos all day. And maybe that's also something that you have to kind of step back and realize. And there again, see, like what I was saying earlier, this crisis of having hyperemesis gravidarum forced me to let go of all those expectations and to see the value of, you know what, my kid is learning, he is or she is learning valuable skills at what they're doing. And it's learning to learn, not learning academics.
Yeah, and sometimes he found this typewriter in the basement of our church, and he's been working at it for hours and hours and hours. And so sometimes I just have to say, you know what, just let him figure it out, and I guess we can do math later.
Yeah. And also, you know, and it's that holistic approach as well, something that you might consider bringing into your Lego time is like, oh, and this might be a little more intensive as a parent. It always is. You know, a lot of people think about unschooling as like, oh, la-di-da, we don't have to do anything. But actually, unschooling is probably the hardest way to homeschool, in my opinion. Of course, everyone has their own opinion, but I think unschooling is the hardest because not only are you going to create an environment, but you're going to follow that child and you're going to facilitate. So like, if your child it works great if you have one kid. If your child was interested in playing Legos, you could sit there with that child and say, wow, let's see what kind of shapes we can build today. Or maybe even just, I don't know, sometimes talking too much is not good. There again, it's that knowledge, you know, when you impose your own ideas and thoughts but rather asking questions, you know, facilitating, oh, what are you doing? Tell me about your structure here. You know, facilitating questions, letting them own the ideas. And again, letting them own that idea of, I am responsible. And you know what? Your kid will love you for it because they will begin to see that, yes, I am responsible. It's the empowerment. You know, you've just empowered your kid with this idea that they can do anything. Wow, I'm responsible. I can do this, right? So here are a bunch of other, some of these, in the last session with Leanne Finch, she talked about Tabatas, and we use the same thing, so that was really reaffirming to me. There is actually online a free Tabata timer, and you can put however many sessions you want. I would have commented, but there were a lot going on. You can put how many sets you want, and it will time 10 seconds on, 20 seconds off, or no, 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, whatever it is. Anyway, Rosetta Stone is a really great thing to learn music, language, DVDs and movies in a different language. That's like one of my favorite things because I love listening. You think a lot of homeschoolers might be like, oh no, we don't watch any TV, which is good because TV just ruins your brain, right? But you watch that same show in a different language, and all of a sudden those little dendrites in their brains and in your brain are working. They're doing something different. They're assimilating. They're thinking. And if you have kids that can also read the captions on it, and you're incorporating some sort of mainstay language program like Rosetta Stone or something else, then they'll actually eventually start talking in French and saying little phrases in French. That's what we use, is French. Saxon math is really hard to learn on your own. The language in it is terrible. I don't know if you've ever tried Saxon math, but I grew up with Saxon math, and I'm a little bit mathematical minded, but I would never recommend it as an individual. But if you have a Dive DVD that can help your child, and these, of course, some of these kind of cost money. So there again, it's the financial commitment as well. I'll let you look through some of these things that I brought here. Oh, what did I do? Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of Duolingo. Have you heard of that?
Yes. Have you tried that?
Uh-huh.
Do you like it?
Yeah, and I had several of our kids downloaded onto their phone too. And we just finished our formal school year. We always do a summer ed program that's kind of short and sweet. But anyway, we finished our formal school year. But I told them next year we're going to work on, we'll use that Duolingo and we'll work on a language.
Yeah, I love language. And there again, it's all about learning to learn. There are so many different ways that you can learn how to learn. For some reason, we have it in our heads that learning means academics. Learning means history and science and math, but learning, there are so many ways to develop the skill of learning. Music is a huge the benefits of learning how to play an instrument, the discipline that comes from doing that. Also, athletics is another really strong way to learn how to learn. So there are other ways that we can teach independence, kind of along the lines of taking responsibility, having a family council, encouraging children to own the ideas, chores, utilizing extended family, stepping out of our comfort zone when our kids' ideas clash with our own personalities, seeing the good in your child's independent movements even when it scares you, letting kids be independent together. I love it when the kids are able to wander out into the back 40 without me. Of course, there has to be a good balance of age there, not two little ones. Recognizing when you are the problem, and sometimes this is the hardest thing to do, is to recognize that, well, I'm getting in the way here. And little things like letting your kids order food and take care of money. So we live on a farm. We do a lot of work. Sometimes we do too much work. This is a picture we took just after we'd finished weeding this entire field. And in that picture, you can't really see it as well because of the lighting, but boy, that field looks so good. It never looks so good. And then this is a big, huge weed that we found that the kids really wanted to display. Learning never learns. So we work so hard that sometimes when winter comes, it's almost palpable. It's like, yay, no more work, no more weeds. So this year we got a great deal with the homeschool group to go snowboarding, and it was $20. You got your lift ticket, you got your snowboard rental, and a lesson. And so we were like, well, okay, let's do this. And the kids chose snowboarding, even though everyone said, don't do snowboarding, it's really hard. That's what they chose. Well, it was pretty rough. I learned them what it means to hit the slopes. In fact, I think I hit the slopes way too many times. And as a result, that's what happened. I broke my elbow, and I'm still experiencing the repercussions of that because you can't really fix that very well. But so I totally displaced my elbow, and then this is us. Oh, you can't really see it too well, but that's me in a sling. So because of that one thing, all this, you're having to keep your arm in a sling. But what I want to say is that I hope that through that experience, my kids will learn that it's okay to fail. I failed miserably that day, and I hope that in the future, maybe next year, we'll be able to get the chance to go snowboarding again. So before I close here, I'd like to share this video clip. I find inspiration in a lot of different places, and this one comes from a chef, and well, I'll just play it for you.
My life has been
Is that as loud as it goes?
at the edge of uncertainty.
I have to listen.
Today, I think we educate kids to be settled in a comfortable chair. You have your job, you have your new car, you have a place to sleep, and the dreams are dead. You don't grow on a secure path. All of us should conquer something in life, and it needs a lot of work, and it needs a lot of risk.
So to conclude, you are a genius maker. You are a genius maker. And oh, I wish that more people, especially people who worked with kids, would realize what their role is, that they are genius makers. Now, these are my kids, but I want you to envision your kids up there, or whoever it is you work with. If you are, even you could think of your spouse can be in this relationship of drawing out the genius in other people. It has been said that after a meeting with the great British Prime Minister William E. Gladstone, you left feeling that he was the smartest person in the world. But after meeting his rival and predecessor, Benjamin Disraeli, you left thinking that you were the smartest person in the world. Now, I know that it's not easy to homeschool. Every day we find ourselves on the edge of uncertainty. But look around you. I mean, this conference has been amazing. There are, you're not alone. Each of us can move and shape the future in very powerful ways. And thank you for coming.